Hello, everybody. Good evening, good day to all of you, and welcome to the 78th live episode of Ask Abhijit. Today, as well, like yesterday, I'm gonna keep it a shorter session, about 60 to 75 minutes. My throat is still not very well, so today will be a slightly abbreviated session. So let us see who all is there. I can see Sakshi Priya, Explorer, Khushi, Sankarshan, Tejas, Kingster, Tanushri, Super Sayan, Tanmay Khand, Samarth, Dungar Singh Chauhan, Keya, Laksha Sharma, Mihir Patel, Sampriti, Harshada, Mox Gaming, Pinak, Pinak Pani Joshi, Harsh Jain, Dev Chandan, Soham Chatterjee, Amol, Tanmay, Bunny, Amar, and many other people. Harshit 2.0, Beast Singh, Gugu. Good evening, good day to all of you. So, what questions do we have? Let us take a look. Let's see what questions we have and let's get right into it. What's the relation between consciousness and quantum mechanics? We don't quite know yet. We know how to use quantum mechanics in doing various things, but we don't know what quantum mechanics actually is, what it's telling us, what the laws of quantum mechanics are telling us, whether consciousness is a factor in quantum mechanics. We still don't know these things. So, my answer is I don't know. Right. What else? um, how Gandhiji gained influence in the Congress after returning to India from South Africa. Why did everyone obey his orders in India? Well, that's the million or billion dollar question. How did this individual who was in South Africa for more than 20 years somehow automatically become so powerful the moment he reached India? So it's clearly, it shows you that the Congress party was a British creation. All the rulers of the Congress party were, well, people who were in the good standing of the British. And Mr. Gandhi also was brought to India by the British and essentially parachuted to the leadership position of the Congress party. That's what happened. So it's all about power structures. What were the real power structures in the Congress, right? And whom were those power structures beholden to? So that's how it was. So it's essentially that the entire setup was created by the British themselves. The founder of the Congress party was Alan Hume, who was British, right? And all the leaders of the Congress party, the big leaders of the Congress party, top leaders, they were all English educated, British educated, Anglophiles. Everything they had, they owed it to the British, right? And so did Mr. Gandhi. So essentially, that's what it was. So Mr. Gandhi, so the aim of the Congress Party was to give an impression to Indians that there is a freedom struggle going on, and it is a civilized freedom struggle. We don't do violence. We don't really do any real harm to the British. We do all this tokenism, and that's what it was all about. All about. So there's a lot still that we don't know. There is a lot that the historians refuse to write about, and the truth will eventually all come out. All right. Okay, let's see some other questions. What is this? Which civilization was alive in the rest of India during the Harappan era? What was the political map of India? India is one single civilization. How many times do I tell you guys this? Huh? India is one single civilization. One, ONE, one. There are not 37 different civilizations in India. The so-called Harappan civilization is the Indian civilization. From north to south, east to west, it's one single civilization. Drill that through your thick skulls. The media will tell you there are civilizations everywhere. Kiladi civilization, some other civilization somewhere else, Chandraketugarh civilization. Every new archaeological site they find, they term it as a civilization. And that's what we all end up believing. There is only one civilization in India. Repeat after me. There's only one civilization in India, and throughout India's history, there has always been one single civilization. It has had lots of different cultural manifestations, lots of local manifestations in different parts of India. And it's always been one civilization. It's always been the worship of the same deities everywhere. You may give the deity a different name, but it's still the same deity. You can call Lord Shiva something else in South India, and something else in East India, and something else in West India, but it's the same God. The overall structure, the overall values, the overall concepts, the overall everything is the same. So my answer is, during the Harappan era, there was only one civilization in the rest of India and all across India, which is Indian civilization. Okay, this is a question I get every week, hundreds of times. The great Indian warrior king Samudragupta is called the Napoleon of India, despite being too much older than Napoleon. Why do these foreign historians frame history in Indian history in such a way? These are Eurocentric historians. They see everything from their own perspective. So why don't we see things from our perspective? Is anybody preventing all of us from seeing things from an Indo-centric perspective? No. We also want to see things from a Eurocentric perspective, unfortunately. So it doesn't matter why they have done it this way or that way. We should see things from our perspective. We know that Samudragupta was alive more than 1,000 years before Napoleon, right? So we can call Napoleon the Samudragupta of India. And you know what? It is not right to call Napoleon the Samudragupta of India. Samudragupta was a victorious king. He never lost. He was the hero of 1,000 battles. He unified the entirety of India, almost the entirety of India, under one political banner, his banner. Napoleon lost. Napoleon lost twice, terribly. He was a loser. And Samudragupta did a lot for India from a cultural perspective, from a civilizational perspective. Napoleon did nothing of that sort for the French people. Yeah, sure, he gave them a code of laws and all that stuff. But overall, he was a very selfish, self centered person. Everything he did was for his own personal glory. He had no concept of civilization or serving the people or any such thing. It was all for me, 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 me. That's all it was. So it is actually wrong to call Napoleon the Samudragupta of India. Napoleon was a much smaller person than Samudragupta, right? Samudragupta was a way greater person, a way greater emperor than Napoleon ever was. So that's what I can say about this, my dear friends. Here we go again. So Saugata Majumdar says Vedic Sanskrit is known as the oldest language in the world. Then why maximum modern words are derived from Greek words? Which maximum modern words are derived from Greek words? Please explain. Give me one example, right? I would like to see some examples of maximum modern. When you talk about maximum modern words, are you talking about language? Which language are you talking about? Are you talking about French? Talking about German? You're talking about Russian? Are you talking about Hindi? Are you talking about Swahili? Which language are you referring to? If you want to ask a question, my dear friend, please frame it properly and give an example or two so that I can understand what you're talking about. So, therefore, I am unable to answer this question. Okay, what else do we have? This is Tejas. What do you think of Tamils trending say no to Sanskrit on Twitter today while they tolerate Urdu universities in Karnataka? Why Tamils hate Sanskrit? Well, you know what? I am not Tamil, so I don't know why they hate Sanskrit. I think it's all the consequence of everything they have been taught in the past 60, 70 years. They worship individuals like that fellow, what's his name? That Periyar fellow, the disgusting fellow called Periyar. They worship him nowadays. And they worship him because they are taught to worship him. They every year they garland the statue of that horrific Bishop Caldwell, and all their Dravidianist parties. They so the entire atmosphere, the entire environment in Tamil Nadu is very much anti-India, anti-Hinduism, anti-Sanskrit, anti-civilization, right? So that's why they hate Sanskrit nowadays. These young kids, they what do they know? That's what they're taught. That's what their parents teach them. That's what their teachers teach them. That's what the media tells them. That's what the politicians tell them. So this is the thing about India today. In Indian democracy today, hating your culture, hating your nation is a good thing. That is to be tolerated under freedom of speech. So that's the kind of India we are living in today. It's a mediocre, third-rate India, and so as long as this education system, this system of governance, this constitution, these laws, they continue, India is going to go backwards. And you will soon see that in other states also the same sort of sentiments are going to start emerging. In the northeast of India, you already have that in certain states which are totally uh, the states that have completely lost their actual original culture and religion, that have been totally Abrahamized. They already hate India. They even hate their own ancestors for being non whatever, for following their own indigenous culture and religion. So that's the kind of India we're living in today. India is a very soft state. Separatism is good. It's a good thing in India. If you express contempt for Hinduism and Indian culture, it's a very good thing actually nowadays in India. So it's no surprise that you see these things. And yeah, Urdu is good because it came from outside of India, right? So it has to be good. That's how it is. Should India block the Malacca Strait to pressurize China, considering the fact that a huge portion of China's trade happens through the Malacca Strait? The question is, does India have the ability to block the Malacca Strait? Does India have the naval firepower to do that? India doesn't. The Indian Navy isn't that powerful, unfortunately. India's Navy is not even good enough right now to be a proper coast guard. What is the strength of a navy? How do you quantify the strength of a navy? Do you quantify it by saying we have these many ships? No. You may have 1,000 ships, but if your ships are toothless, then they are pointless. Right? The strength of a navy has only one measure, and that measure is the number of offensive missiles you can deploy at sea at any given time. So if you look at the Chinese, on any given day, they can deploy approximately 1,500 offensive missiles on their navy. The Japanese have a similar number, approximately 1,500 or so, maybe 1,300, I would say, offensive missiles the Japanese navy can deploy at any given time. So right now, approximately 1,300 missiles will be deployed. So that is the strength of a navy. Well, let's do a similar calculation for the Indian Navy. I'll not give the numbers, but they are abysmally low, right? And therefore, India is not currently in a position to block the Malacca Strait, even if it wants to. The question is, let's say you send some ships there, you blockade the strait, but then what are the consequences? Can you indefinitely sustain such a blockade? Does the Indian Navy have the ability to indefinitely sustain a blockade like that? And the answer is most likely no. And can India deal with the consequences of blockading the strait? Let's say you blockade the strait, you successfully blockade it for a week, 2 weeks, 1 month, 2 months, then what happens? What are the downstream consequences? Does India know what the consequences are? We know what the consequences are. Can India deal with these consequences? We have to think like that, right? We can't say, okay, let's go and blockade it. After that, what happens? We have to think. We have to look at all the second order, third order, fourth order, fifth order, 10th order, 20th order effects of doing such a thing. Only then do you actually consider doing such a thing seriously. And you want to pressurize China? There are lots of ways of pressurizing China, but we have to consider all the effects, right, before we can even think of it. And as of today, I don't think India has the ability to do it. And therefore, I would say India at this point in time, at this juncture, should not think of blockading the Malacca Strait. For India to be able to do that, we need to augment the navy significantly. We need to have at least 50 submarines. We need to have like at least 100 more warships, and we need to have the ability to deploy at least 1,000 offensive missiles at any given time. Then we can think of doing such a thing. All right. Okay, what else do we have? Pushkar Kumar says Xuanzang, Hiuen Tsang, Xuanzang mentions a type of rice called mahasali, only found in the Magadha region. Its each grain is as large as a black bean. Is this variety of rice still present and grown somewhere? Well, I am not aware of it. I know that in the northeast of India, there is a variety of rice that is black in color or dark purple in color. They make kheer out of it, right? So it's found in Nagaland, Manipur, etc., and other places also. There is also a kind of rice, a variety of rice which is red in color in the so-called northeast of India. And there must have been many other varieties of rice in India, like what you're mentioning, but I am not sure if this specific variety mahasali that you're referring to, it's still, is it still grown somewhere? I'm not sure about it. I think what happened during the so-called green revolution during the Congress regime was that everything was standardized. India had so many varieties of rice and so many other varieties of crops that were all essentially wiped out, and only one or two varieties of rice were grown, and only one or two varieties of wheat were grown as part of the so-called green revolution, which essentially bankrupted the the incredible varieties of various staples we had, the crops that we had. So, for instance, we had millet. We had the crops called jowar bajra in Indian languages, right? Those were crops that were staples for thousands of years, and today very few people even have heard of these crops. So that's what the so-called green revolution did. It kind of made a mess of India's agriculture, and maybe many of these varieties may have gone out of existence permanently, because of that. I hope that is not the case, but I personally haven't seen this specific variety of rice that you are speaking about, unfortunately. Okay, let me take a couple of questions from the comments which I was not able to answer before. Okay, the real reason of Parsi wealth is that they traded opium with China. Many made crores of Chinese lives like hell. Ultimately bankrupted its economy and made it a British prey when Hindu traders denied that sin money. Yeah, it is well known that the Parsi businessmen were employed by the British um, to be at the forefront of the opium trade with China. So the so-called opium wars were a very famous event. It's not one war; it was at least two wars that occurred in the 19th century. So what happened is that the British, they had defeated the Chinese. The British, Americans, and a bunch of European powers had defeated the Chinese Empire, and they were forcing them to purchase opium and other cash cash crops in exchange for gold, essentially. So they were extracting all the value out of China and in exchange giving China opium and addicting millions of Chinese to this terrible poison, right? So that's, and you need manpower to do this. So the manpower was essentially the Parsi traders. That's essentially how the Parsis became so incredibly rich. They had these opium warehouses, they had the opium business, the all the big major Parsi trading houses that you know of today, they all started off in the opium trade, in the drug business. So they had these opium warehouses in Shanghai and other places. Even the Sassoons who are supposed to be the great philanthropists, etc., they were drug runners. David Sassoon had a very big opium business in Shanghai. I think there's a building called Sassoon House that still stands in Shanghai. It's used for something else. It was their warehouse, I think, where they stored the drug, the opium. So that's how these so-called business people got started off. That's how they derived all their wealth. This is not a controversial matter. This is a matter of record. Everyone knows this. So yes, what you are saying, Gautam, is absolutely right. All right. How can we have a sharp mind like you as you recall so much data so easily? Well, what I mean, the reason I recall things is that I give always give myself permission to forget things, right? So when I read something, I know that if I don't find it interesting, I'm not going to remember it. I don't care. I don't have to remember everything I read. I would say more than half of what I read, I actively forget it. I say it's not important. I am not interested. I will forget it. And the second thing is that when I read something that I find interesting, I make mental connections. Oh yeah, I come across this new information. Yeah, it reminds me of this thing and that thing and that thing. So this creates these mental connections. So I am doing active reading, not passive reading. That just read something and just go through it. No, when I'm reading, I'm also thinking. So when I come across a new concept, new idea, new information, I correlate it mentally with other things that I know about, that I know of, other pieces of information that I already have in my mind, other concepts, other ideas that I have in my mind. I try to link it with that, and I try to ask myself, how can I argue against this? For instance, how can I argue against what is being said in this book, or how can I put the concept differently, or what can I compare it with? So that way it creates lots of mental connections, and that's why it's easier to recall information, supposedly. I mean, maybe that's how it works. I'm not quite sure. But the thing is, when you read, you have to read actively. Don't read passively. You're not watching a movie. You're trying to absorb new information and understand new ideas. So do it actively and create connections with other ideas that may already be there in your mind. And if you find this information, whatever you're reading, not interesting, give yourself permission to forget it. It doesn't matter. So that's kind of how I do things. That's what works for me. I'm sure everybody is different, but try it this way. Maybe it may work. Yeah. Okay. What about belief of Hitler about Aryan race? Hitler was stupid. Forget about him. What would be the condition of India today if India hadn't been invaded by the foreigners? India would have been a better place. Okay, what else do we have? Something interesting, please. Something interesting. Give me some interesting questions. Paritosh says, why Elon and NASA want to bring humans to Mars, as Mars is much nearer to the asteroid belt and has a danger of asteroids on Earth. Where did you get this information that there's a danger of asteroids there? We have never witnessed any asteroid strike on on Mars, and yeah, it is closer to the asteroid belt than to the Earth, but the asteroid belt is still a huge, humongous distance away from Mars. The asteroid belt is roughly between the orbits of Mars and Jupiter, and it's really, really, really far away from Mars. And even if you go into the asteroid belt, it's almost empty. You won't find an asteroid for kilometers, hundreds of kilometers, maybe millions of kilometers around you. That's how it is. Even the asteroid belt is very empty. So this danger. I mean, I'm sure this is what you studied and learned in school, but the danger that you're referring to is over exaggerated. So the reason why Elon Musk. Let's talk about Elon Musk, not NASA. NASA has never said we need to bring humans to Mars. Elon Musk keeps emphasizing that. So his logic is that we are messing up the planet, and it's always good to have plan B. It's always good to be a multi-planetary species in case something goes wrong with one planet. We know what happened to the dinosaurs. We know that there was a either an asteroid strike or a cometary strike in conjunction with other events that happened on our planet, like the Deccan traps, etc., that essentially killed off a significant majority of the species on our planet at that time. So we don't want something like that to happen to us, and therefore it always makes sense to have another planet to go to. And that's why he wants to bring humans to Mars. And also because we have this entire situation going on right now of climate change and the pollution of the atmosphere and the oceans and all that, we may end up ruining this planet and making it uninhabitable. In that case, it's always good to have a second planet. So that's some of the logic that's going around, and that's why uh, Elon Musk is trying to make us a multiplanetary species, and he aims to send a rocket with human beings to Mars pretty soon, maybe in the next 20 years maximum. Okay, where are we? Where else are we? Manu Gowda says, does city state concept work good for some Indian cities today. See, the city state concept was present in ancient Greece when you had these city states like Athens, like Sparta, and so on. But these were independent states. These were like independent countries, but cities, city states. In India, we had various Ganarajyas, republics, Mahajanapadas, etc., which are also smaller sized, smaller scaled republics. But the city state concept essentially says that you have independent cities. And how will that work for India? India is one single nation, right? In case of some cities, like some cities are so large they have a population of several million. For instance, Delhi is an enormous city. Kolkata, Mumbai, many of these metropolitan cities are, their population exceeds that of many countries actually, right? So maybe there's a case to be made to convert each of these cities into its own state, perhaps. So there is an experiment that could be tried that would hopefully give better governance and administration, etc. But yeah, that's what I can say. So in case of certain very large metropolitan cities, you could possibly do that sort of experiment and create a city state framework, perhaps. I don't know. So maybe it could work. Maybe it would give better governance. It's something certainly that one can think of and perhaps try it out. What is akashic records? Well, I don't know what that is. Nope, I don't know. When Mr. Gandhi led a protest, why was he never injured? Why the British tried to stop using violence? Was Mr. Gandhi on a was Mr. Gandhi on a diet that made him strong physically? No, uh, the British never ever tried to uh, hit Mr. Gandhi in any way whatsoever. The reason he was never injured is that because the British made sure he was never injured. He was special somehow to the British. They had special affection for Mr. Gandhi, apparently. When it comes to Mr. Lala Lajpat Rai, he was killed, right? He was beaten to death during one of his protests. And many Indians were beaten to death during demonstrations and protests against the British. But somehow Mr. Gandhi's protests were special. The British never ever touched Mr. Gandhi. Isn't that fascinating? All right. What else do we have? Uh, where is it? Oops. Should Gandhi's image be replaced with that of Mr. Bose and also some others who also did contribute to the freedom struggle on Indian notes currency? I would say, yeah, why not? Why not? Mr. Gandhi wasn't the only one who contributed to India's freedom struggle. Actually, he did well. That's for that's for you all to judge. But yes, certainly, why not Mr. Bose? Why not Mr. Bose? Mr. Bose is the man who actually scared the pants of the British, and it's the reason why the British actually decided to leave. You know, because Mr. Bose was so popular, especially among the armed forces, the Royal Indian Navy, the Royal British Army, or whatever they called it, and they were so scared they decided to leave post haste. So it's actually Mr. Bose who contributed to the hasty withdrawal of the British from India. So I would say yes. Why don't we have Mr. Bose on India's currency notes? Why not? I really wonder why it's not being done. After all these years, 70 years, we still see the same old face, same tired old face on our currency notes. So I think it's certainly time for a change of that kind. All right. What else do we have? Okay, let me take some questions from. Okay, what is this here? This is a long question. Akash says, what is the definition of dharma by Krishna? It's so confusing. He does things that Rama would never do. Why both are contradictory? Why always every Indian king followed the way of Rama and not Krishna, not attacking enemies when they're running away from battle? Prithviraj Chauhan. etc., etc., etc. It looks like they were following Rama's way. If they were following Krishna's way, they would never have been defeated. As per me, Krishna Dharma is to go to any extent, do anything, do ultimate intolerance if it establishes Dharma, isn't it? What's your view on how Krishna interpreted Dharma? See, you can make it very complicated or you can make it very, very simple. What Krishna interpreted Dharma is what's written in the Bhagavad Gita, right? So the Bhagavad Gita is actually it's quite simple. In two words, it is destroy adharma. Do whatever it takes to destroy adharma. That's it. That is the simple message that is given in the Bhagavad Gita. Don't overcomplicate things. Your only duty as a king, as a ruler, as a warrior is to do whatever it takes to destroy adharma. Now we have to understand the difference between Lord Rama and Lord Krishna, right? Lord Ram lived in the Treta Yuga. Lord Krishna lived in the Dwapar Yuga. These are different yugas, right? So during the Treta Yuga, it is said that the world was a much better place, and therefore Lord Rama could. It was okay for him to conduct himself in a more idealistic way than what Lord Krishna could afford to do during the Dwapar Yuga, because the Dwapar Yuga, the conditions were different, human nature was different, and the worst yuga obviously is today the Kali Yuga. So today we have to go even worse, go even beyond what Lord Krishna said, and follow the precepts of Vishnugupta Chanakya. See, even in the Arthashastra, the principal duty of the king is to serve the nation and the people. The highest morality of a king is that his kingdom and his people should prosper. Right? That's so. Again, it's all about service. It's about the king's duty is not to enjoy life and enjoy the power and money and all that. His only duty is to serve. The king is a servant. His only duty is to put the nation and the people ahead of his comfort and his pleasure and joy and all that. But the way to do it is different in the Arthashastra. In the Arthashastra, the king is enjoined to do whatever it takes, even crooked means, even assassinations, even poisonings, even all kinds of other things, in order to succeed in serving the people and the nation. Right? So in the Treta Yuga, it was different. In the Dwapar Yuga, it was different, and in the Kali Yuga also, it was different. But the aim of the king was always the same. The duty of the king was always the same: to serve the people and the nation. Right? So the definition of dharma by per Krishna is very simple: do whatever it takes to destroy adharma. That's essentially what the entire Mahabharat war is about, and that's what the Bhagavad Gita is about. Do your duty, forget whatever uh, Maya you observe, just do your duty and don't worry about the uh, results. That's what he said to Arjun. So that's what I can say in brief. I like to keep things very simple. All right, let us go back to the questions. Um, what else do we have? Okay, what do we have here? History of the Khan title: How radio electromagnetic waves help in astrophysics as they cannot be visualized. Let me answer the first question. The history of the Khan title. So today, Khan is a very very common surname among the Muslim people in the subcontinent of India. Even in Iran, I believe. So in India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Afghanistan, etc., many Muslims have the surname or title Khan, and they seem to consider it something that adds some prestige to them, right? And even in Iran, I think the title Khan or surname Khan is used to some extent. So, so therefore, the common belief in India and other places is that Khan is a Muslim surname, but that is not the case. Khan is not a Muslim surname; it's a Mongol title. It means leader or ruler, all right? And it's not just a Mongol title; it is something even the Turks used for the same purpose, to denote leader. So the Mongols and the Turks, they have a common origin, and their ancestors were called the Hunnic peoples, the Huns. And we Indians also had uh, we had many encounters with the Huns. Uh, so their native culture, religion, whatever you want to call it, is called Tengrism in English. Tengrism. So the principal deity is the sky god called Tengri, and the mother goddess called Umai. I believe she's called Umai. And there's a whole other pantheon of minor gods and deities and all. So it's a polytheistic culture. So Tengrism is what it's called in the West and in English. So it is a culture that was common to the Turkic peoples and the Mongolic peoples and their ancestors, the Hunnic peoples. And therefore, the original Turkic language is also very similar to the original Mongol language. In fact, when Turkey became independent, the father of the nation, Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, he ordered that all Arabic words be removed from Turkish and the equivalent Mongol words should be used in their place. So he knew that the Mongolian language is purer than the Turkish language, but it's also very similar. So these peoples, the Hunnic peoples, the Turks and the Mongols, they called their leaders Khans. Han. It's not actually K. It's not a hard K. It's more like a H. Han. And the greatest of the Khans, as we know, was Chinggis Khan. He was actually the Khan of the Khans. He was a Khagan. And we had other Khans such as Ogode Khan, Kublai Khan, and so on and so forth. So when the Mongols suddenly expanded across Eurasia under the leadership of Genghis Khan, they essentially almost destroyed the Islamic world. Almost. And they conquered Baghdad, which was then the center of the Islamic world. It was the seat of the Islamic Caliphate. They sacked Baghdad, they sacked the Khwarazm Empire, and they went far and wide. And they essentially started ruling all these Islamic territories. And eventually, the Mongols who were ruling these territories, because of assimilation, etc., those Mongols would eventually have converted to Islam. And what happened is that all the rulers at that time of the Islamic world were all Khans, Mongol Khans. And therefore, this title Khan, it acquired a certain extreme prestige among the Islamic peoples. And then slowly, they started using the term in their own lives and for themselves. So that's how the term Khan entered the Islamic world, because their overlords were the great Mongol Khans. And over time, over the centuries, it became kind of part and parcel of the Islamic world and Islamic life. And that's how today you will see lots of Indian Muslims, Pakistani Muslims, Afghans, etc., using that as as their surname essentially. So that, in short, is the history of the Khan title. What else do we have? Let's see some other questions. I don't know much about the origin of Telugu, so can't answer that. What else do we have? Why does Wikipedia support the Aryan migration theory? Well, you know what? I can answer why I support certain things. If somebody else does it, you need to go ask them. I don't know really know. I don't know how people's minds work. I don't know why people think the way they do. So I can only answer for myself, unfortunately. Did you read the whole Arthashastra? Yes, I have read it more than once, the whole Arthashastra, and I have yet to digest much of it. It's a very complex and detailed book. It's not an easy read by any means, right? So it's something that you have to read multiple times, and every time you read it, even if you may have read it in the past, you will still find so much new information that you may not have properly understood before. So you learn something new every time you read it. And similarly with Indian philosophical texts, you may have read the entire philosophical treatise, what's it called, the principal Upanishads, and yet every time you reread it, you will find gems that you may not have noticed before. So that's how it goes. Family relations between Prophet Muhammad and Samudragupta. What are you smoking, dear sir? Oh, good God. Um, Let me see some. What else do we have? Your views on Mahatma Gandhi's proposal to adopt non-violence as national defense policy. Yes, the best defense policy is don't defend yourself. It's bound to succeed, isn't it? Just look at Tibet. Look at Tibet. They believed in non-violence. When the Chinese invaded, they said, please, dear sirs, please leave. This is our land. Please don't be so violent and so rude. And see where they are today, the Tibetans. That's what happens when you adopt non-violence as your official defense policy. Mr. Gandhi, if he had his way, India would be broken into 1,000 pieces today. So that's my views about Mr. Gandhi's proposal. I don't know anything about the various castes of India. So sorry. I don't know. I can't answer. Okay. Who was Ataturk and why is he so important for the Turks? Okay. So that's a good question. Mustafa Kemal Ataturk is is considered to be the father of the modern nation of Turkey. And why is this so important? It's because Turkey exists essentially only because of him. Otherwise, Turkey would have been fragmented and broken off into different pieces and parceled off to different countries and different rulers. That's what would have happened. So it's like this. Uh, there have been several caliphates, the Rashidun Caliphate and various Umayyad Caliphate, Abbasid Caliphate, and so on. And the last caliphate was the Ottoman Caliphate. Its capital was Constantinople, Istanbul, right? And the caliph was the Ottoman Sultan, the head of the Ottoman Empire. Now, the last great Ottoman Sultan was Suleiman. Suleiman, they call him Suleiman the Magnificent. After Suleiman, all the other caliphs who came after him, with the exception of one or two, they were all degenerates, they were all losers. And their only preoccupation was the palace politics and the harem. That's their only preoccupation. And as a consequence of that, as a consequence of that, Turkey over the years became weaker and weaker. It still had its huge possessions, all the big territories it had conquered during the heyday of the Ottoman Empire, large parts of Eastern Europe, uh, Syria, Mesopotamia, Greece, Northern Africa, and so on and so forth. Yes, but Turkey over time became really weak, and its governance became very rigid. Its society became very rigid, and in the 19th century, Turkey was known as the sick man of Europe. That's what Turkey was looked upon as. Now, what happened in the late 19th century is that there were many wars. Turkey allied itself with the Germans. There were conflicts with the Russian Empire and the British and so on. And Turkey essentially became very weak, and it was invaded by various forces, the Russians, the English, etc. And some of them were just a few miles away from the capital city, Constantinople. And the Turkish Caliph, the Ottoman Sultan, he spent his time playing one power against the other, and that's how he remained independent. So it's in the 19th century that this boy Mustafa was born, and he was a brilliant soldier, a very strange man. He had no friends and all that, but he was a brilliant soldier. He participated in several wars, acquitted himself brilliantly, and all that. Now, in the early 20th century, Turkey finally entered the First World War, and Turkey allied itself with Germany, which was a mistake. So, at the end of the war, Turkey lost, and Turkey was partitioned essentially by the victorious powers, the Western powers, and it was occupied by the Western powers. That's what happened. And to make a long story short, what Mustafa Kemal Atatürk did was that he rebelled against this. He rebelled against his own Ottoman emperor, the Caliph, and He sparked off the Turkish War of Independence against the Western powers, against the Bulgarians, the Greeks, and the Ottomans themselves. And to make a long story short, he ended up prevailing at a great risk to his own life. He did all this, but he prevailed. He was a brilliant soldier, brilliant commander, and he won independence for Turkey. And he was able to carve out a reasonably small, compact nation of Turkey for the Turks. And all the other territories that were part of the Ottoman Empire, he just let them go. He didn't care about that. And then after the war was over, he became the president for life, essentially, of Turkey. And then he became an administrator. He put away his military uniform. He would never wear it again. And he instituted all kinds of reforms in Turkey. He secularized Turkey. He banned the burqa and all that stuff. He um, tried to make Turkey in the image of a Western nation, a modern nation. He modernized Turkey. He essentially tried to ban Islam from Turkey, eradicate Islam from Turkey. He changed the alphabet from the from the Arabic alphabet to a Latinized alphabet, and so on and so forth. So he did a lot of things that completely transformed Turkey from a backward-looking 19th century nation to a modern 20th century republic. Right? So the Turkish people gave him the title of Ataturk, which means the father of the Turks. And even today, the Turkish politicians, they try to claim the legacy in some way or the other of Ataturk, even though Turkey is now going back towards Islamization, but still they try to claim the legacy of Ataturk. That whatever we are doing is what Ataturk would have wanted, that sort of thing. So that, in short, is who Ataturk was and why he was so important for the Turks. I would say he was one of the greatest military commanders of all time and one of the most colossal leaders of the 20th century, for sure. A really, really significant personality of the 20th century. Okay, what else do we have? Was Arunachal Pradesh ever part of any Chinese empire? On what grounds does China claim it? China has no grounds for claiming anything. Arunachal Pradesh has never been part of any Chinese empire. The Chinese have had no presence ever in Arunachal Pradesh or even really in Tibet. The only basis of the Chinese claim on Tibet and all that is the fact that Tibet was a Mongolian protectorate. So it's like this. China was in the 13th and 14th century, I think. China was under the reign of the Yuan dynasty. The Yuan dynasty is what's called a conquest dynasty. It was founded by Kublai Khan, who was a Mongol conqueror, and Kublai Khan backdated the dynasty to his grandfather, Chinggis Khan. So, according to this chronology, the first emperor of the Yuan dynasty is Chinggis Khan. The second is Ogodei Khan. The third is Kublai Khan, and so on. So, this was a conquest dynasty. It was a Chinese dynasty, but the emperors were all Mongols. Now, the relationship that the Yuan dynasty had with Tibet is that of Guru Shishya, teacher and student. The Tibetans were the teachers, the Yuan dynasty, the Mongols, were the students. So essentially, all their priests, all their Brahmins, so to say, were Tibetan priests, Tibetan monks. Because the Mongolians, Kublai Khan had decreed that Tibetan Buddhism is like the de facto state religion of the Yuan Empire. And the Mongols were not very good at Buddhism and all that, so they would employ Tibetan masters, Tibetan gurus, as the officiators of all the ceremonies and all that, right? And in exchange, not in exchange, but because all their gurus came from Tibet, that's why they considered Tibet to be their protectorate, which means that it was under Mongol protection. But there was no case ever of Mongol soldiers and armies being stationed in Tibet. Tibet was never under Mongolian occupation. They had the highest respect for Tibet, right? So the thing is, the Mongolians had the highest of respect for Indian culture, and they had imbibed Indian culture through Tibet. Tibet was the intermediary, and that's why they gave the same respect to Tibet as well. So Tibet was a Mongolian protectorate. It was a protectorate of the Yuan dynasty, which was a Mongolian dynasty in China. But today the Chinese Communist Party says that the Yuan dynasty, which is a Chinese dynasty, it owned Tibet. and that's why Tibet should be part of China. That is the convoluted logic the Chinese Communist Party employs today. And then they claim that because the sixth Dalai Lama was born in Tawang, which is in Arunachal Pradesh, that's why Arunachal Pradesh is supposed to be regarded as South Tibet, and that's why that also belongs to China. That's the ridiculous, stupid, imbecilic logic the Chinese Communist Party employs to further its territorial claims. Right. So that, in brief, is the story of the so-called Chinese claim on Arunachal Pradesh, which is a lie. Harshit says, is there a need for India to change its capital due to pollution and low visibility in winter? If yes, what should be the priorities while choosing a new capital, effect on economy and its pros and cons? I think it's high time India should dump Delhi as the capital. Delhi has never been a good capital for India. I mean, from the time of Indraprastha, etc., it's always been a city of bad luck, if you believe in such things, right? And today, if you see Delhi, it's a congested, deeply, highly polluted city, and all that. It's always hostage to all kinds of nonsensical activities. I think it is high time that India should choose a new capital. India should build a new capital from scratch somewhere, ideally in the heartland of India, somewhere equidistant from all four corners of India. That's the kind of thing India needs to do. I think I think the priorities while choosing a new capital should be, it should be equidistant to all four corners of India. It should be equally accessible from everywhere. It should have excellent connectivity with the entire country. It should be in the heart of the country, not in some extreme border region. Like Delhi is about 200 kilometers away from the Tibetan border today, right? So it's easy for the Chinese to target Delhi if they wish to. So that sort of thing also has to be looked into. So that's what I would say. I think it is not a bad idea at all for India to choose a new capital, to build a new capital city from scratch, somewhere in the heartland of India, maybe somewhere in central India, and make it a city only for administration. No other population is needed there. Only administrators, army, and all that, and all the facilities should be available there. And yeah, so that's a good idea, I would say. How can we evolve our species artificially? I don't think it's an, this entire thing of playing God and trying to tinker with your genetic code and trying to tinker with your bone structure and all. It is not a good idea at all. We simply don't understand how our genes work. Let me explain about the human genome now. So now the human genome exists in 23 chapters. It's like a book in 23 chapters, 23 pairs of chromosomes, and each pair of chromosome has a certain bunch of genes in it, right? Now if you look at the entire genetic code of humans, more than 97-98% of this genetic code is called non-coding DNA. It doesn't code for any proteins, and some scientists term it as the dark matter of DNA or junk DNA. And they call it junk DNA because they don't know what it does. It doesn't seem to do anything. That's why they've called it junk DNA. Those scientists are idiots. Nature is parsimonious. Nothing is wasted. Nothing exists for no reason. If there are all these gene sequences in our genome, and let's say they're not doing anything right now, it doesn't mean they're useless. They do serve some function, some purpose. Maybe we don't understand it today. It means it is our stupidity and our lack of understanding rather than the fault of the genome that it is there, right? So I would say, and many scientists, they say that, oh, it's okay to use CRISPR and turn some genes off and also turn some genes on and insert some genes here and there, and in human beings. And there are all these genetically modified organisms that are being created, new crops with certain supposedly beneficial properties and all that. You know what? People are tinkering with genes without really understanding the long term downstream effects of all that. And most of these effects, they are visible only after 10, 20, 30 generations. By the time, it's impossible to do anything to change that. So I think we humans have this very silly tendency to try and play God, especially with genetics and all that, trying to evolve our species artificially. I think it's a very dangerous thing to do. We know next to nothing of genetics today. 97, 98% of our own genome is not understood at all, and yet we want to tinker with it. Just imagine the amount of stupidity that some scientists have, that they think they can get away with this sort of thing and actually do some good for humanity. So I would say that it is not a good idea to play games with nature, to play games with our genetics and with our physiology. Evolution is supposed to happen at its own pace. If you look at the history of the human species, we haven't changed much in the past 100,000 years, 1 lakh years. So, if you want to see changes in a species, you have to look at it 100,000 years at a time, or maybe even longer. That's the kind of time it takes for evolution to become apparent. So, we have to be patient, we have to let ourselves evolve naturally, and we should desist from trying to make artificial changes because it's going to end up costing us in the long run. Not us, our descendants. Yeah, I don't know, sir. I don't know. See, I get lots of questions about what is this caste and what is that caste and what is their origin. I don't know anything about this. I have never been interested in the study of castes and the origin of this caste and that caste. I don't even know the origin of my whatever caste it may be. I'm not interested. I am a big picture student of history. I look at the history from a big picture perspective. So I don't know who the Kayasthas are, and I'm sure they are very significant people. I'm sure we all are significant in our own way, but I don't know these small histories. I'm not trying to mean that these small histories of small communities mean that they are not interesting or important. They are all important, but I don't know. Sorry. All right. Okay, here is another wonderful misconception. So the question is, did Oppenheimer create the nuclear bomb using some Sanskrit text? The nuclear bomb was developed as a consequence of the Manhattan Project. Hundreds of physicists were involved in this. It was not one guy who went and made a nuclear bomb, right? So J. Robert Oppenheimer was the scientist who was in overall charge of the product of the project, the Manhattan Project, the project of creating the nuclear bomb. And it was created using the principles and the laws of nuclear physics, not some Sanskrit text. There is no Sanskrit text about a nuclear bomb or nuclear energy or quantum mechanics anywhere. Please understand this. So the thing is, there is this concept everywhere. Lots and lots of people ask me this question: that do we have some secret Sanskrit text that give you the formula for nuclear bombs and quantum mechanics and relativity and all that? No, 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 no. There is no Sanskrit text that I know of that does any of these things. All right. So what J. Robert Oppenheimer is known for, especially in India, is for quoting the Bhagavad Gita uh, when the first nuclear explosion took place. So that is something you find among lots of physicists, especially theoretical physicists, that they are somehow drawn to Indian philosophy towards Sanskrit and all that. So there is a reason for that. That's a different story altogether. And when J. Robert Oppenheimer witnessed the first nuclear explosion, he was reminded of some verse from the Bhagavad Gita. I have become death, or something like that. So that has nothing to do with the creation of the nuclear bomb, right? Okay, here is another wonderful, very common belief about the Mahabharata, about the past in India, that we could all. Okay, the question is was interspace travel present possible during the Mahabharata? Arjuna visited Swarga Loka to gain power from his father Indra. Balrama's father-in-law visited Brahmaloka. So how do we know Swarga Loka is some other planet and Brahmaloka is some other planet? Lok doesn't necessarily mean a different planet, right? So you know what? We are taking things too literally, and we are interpreting all these things as space travel and I don't know what. You know what? There is no evidence we had any such thing during the Mahabharata era, but Indians believe this very strongly, that we had We had interstellar travel, and we could go to different universes and all things like that. There is no evidence for that, unfortunately. From my perspective, there is no evidence of that whatsoever. So that's what I can say. Okay, what else do we have? Chakshu Chaudhary says, "Can you please name some leader who can unify India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and all our civilization back, and also some qualities which leaders need and which points should he stand on to unify?" I don't know any leader today who can unify the subcontinent. Such a leader will come in the future, or maybe is already born, but I don't know of any leader who can achieve this feat today. Right. So that's what I can say. What qualities do leaders need and all that? Well, look back in history and think of the greatest leaders we have had. Those are the qualities a future leader would need to be able to reunify the subcontinent. Think of Lord Ram, Lord Krishna, Chandragupta Maurya, Kanishka the Great, Samudragupta, Lalitaditya, and Rajaraj Chola, Rajendra Chola, etc. Think about those leaders and ask yourself what qualities they had. Those are the qualities we are looking for. Should a leader be the product of the society, or should the society be the product of the leader in the case of Bharat? I would say that a leader in if a leader were to emerge who can transform Bharat completely, that leader will not be the product of the society, because the society we live in today is a mediocre society with very low standards. So a leader, if a leader were to emerge with the same characteristics, then that leader would also have low standards and be a mediocre person. Look at most leaders today. Not all, not all. Some leaders are good, some leaders are exceptional, but the overall majority of, of politicians you see today are mediocre people. People with low standards, who are only self-centered, who only care for themselves, and who are very happy to be corrupt. Right? So we need leaders who break this mold. So in that case, if a great leader does emerge, then he or she will then force the society to change and become more like them. You know what they say about cricket teams? The cricket team, if you look at any cricket team, India, Australia, whatever else, the entire team automatically takes on the personality of the leader. So when you have a very of the captain, so when you have a very soft spoken, gentle captain, the entire team becomes docile like sheep. On the other hand, if you have a mad dog captain, the entire team becomes like that. They all take on the personality of their captain. So the same goes for nations also. When you have an extremely confident, vigorous, dynamic leader, then the whole nation becomes invigorated like that. And when you have a leader like Mr. Manmohan Singh, you see what happens to the entire society. So I would say that a leader should always be more exceptional and greater than the average of of the society. And then the society should become the product of the leader, and try to mold themselves in the image of the leader. That is what needs to happen, especially today in India. So this is an excellent question. Okay. What other questions do we have? Let's see. Can we compare modern days nuclear weapon to the Dwapar Yug's Brahmastra? Listen, I don't know the characteristics of the Brahmastra. I don't know the details, the specifications, and the blast yield or any such thing. So how do I compare? Nuclear weapons come in various sizes. There are standard fission weapons. There are fission fusion thermonuclear weapons. There are multiple stage weapons. There is a neutron bomb as well, right? There are different yields, etc. I know how the nuclear physics works in the case of the nuclear bombs, right? What the Brahmastra was, I don't know, right? How was it activated? What were the principles behind it? I don't know. So then, how can I compare the two? I unfortunately cannot compare the two. Vikram Kumar says, would India remain in one piece by the end of this decade? I don't see why not. What makes you think, Vikram, that we would not remain in one piece by the end of this decade? I personally see no reason why India should not remain in one piece. I think that India in the next 20, 30 years is going to be a superpower, God's willing. So I don't know why you're so pessimistic, Vikram. Come on. Come on. How can we pursue our ASI to excavate and find evidence of our dharmic civilization? I have no hopes in the ASI. India needs to disband the ASI and then create a new professional archaeological organization from scratch, because the majority of the ASI people are just bureaucrats. They just don't care. And if you see all the monuments, temples, etc., that are under the ASI's care, they are being plundered. They're being plundered blind. So I have no hope from the ASI. I don't want to pursue or persuade them to do anything. I just want them to be disbanded. The original objective of the ASI, which you may not know, it's a British creation. The British created the ASI in the 19th century. The original objective of the ASI was to find treasures that the British could plunder and take out of the country and put them in the British Museum and various other Western museums. So that's what the ASI, in some way or the other, is still actually enabling and facilitating. And you know what? I can show you news report after news report. I can show you hundreds of news reports in which temples and monuments that are under the ASI's protection have been plundered. Right? This is all known. So, so I really don't have any hope left for the ASI. How did Hanuman reach the sun to eat it? Maybe I'm not the right person to ask this. Yeah, maybe I'm not. Okay. Darshan says, is plastic really harmful to the environment? Yes, plastic is extremely harmful to the environment, and the simple reason for that is it is not biodegradable. There are no microbes or natural processes that can degrade and decompose plastic, and because of that, plastic remains present in the environment, either in soil or in water, for decades, even for centuries. And what happens is that if it stays in water for decades, in the oceans, for instance, in the rivers, in lakes, etc., then it fragments into smaller and smaller pieces, eventually becoming microscopic pieces called microplastics. And then what happens is that it ends up in our food supply and water supply. And whenever you drink water from a bottle or from the tap, or when you eat something, let's say you're eating fish, for instance, in Japan, then if you examine the flesh of the fish under a microscope, you will find that it is embedded with these microplastics. So you are ingesting plastic, then it's going into you, and it's going to embed you in your flesh also, and into the bodies of your children and so on. It's going to end up poisoning the entire planet in the entire ecosystem. That's how plastic is incredibly harmful to the environment. It is choking the oceans. It is creating these islands of anoxia. It is descending to the bottoms of the ocean and choking the place there, uh, and so many other things. So it's incredibly harmful to the environment, and we are doing nothing. We're doing nothing to stop it. It's terrible. All right, where else? Where else are we? Is China hiding its current COVID-19 scenario? Most likely it is. So the first few months, the Chinese gave out some numbers of how many COVID cases they had. That's I'm talking about the early 2020, the first half of 2020. And after a while, they just stopped reporting numbers, and the whole Western media just didn't care. They just kept focusing on India, and they did not say a peep about the fact that the Chinese had stopped giving out any numbers at all. So China can afford to be completely opaque, and the Western media won't say a thing about it. So yes, I would say that China is certainly hiding its current COVID-19 scenario. We don't know what's going on in China. China is always very opaque. That's just how it is. Okay. What happened to Vishnu's Sudarshan Chakra? Did it really turn into stone after Vishnu cursed it? Maybe I'm not the right person to ask this. Maybe I'm not, right? Okay. Why did the US invade Latin American places 41 times in the 20th century when all these countries were very far away and not scary for them? It's not, they're not scared of anyone. It's about power projection. It's about creating a world order that is explicitly based on what you say. The US is an imperial power. Please understand this. The US is a hegemonic power, it's an imperial power. It's the US empire that you are living under, whether you know it or not. And that's what the Chinese are trying to replicate today. So the Americans did this because the Latin American countries were trying to do their own thing. And how dare they? Right. So that's the whole murky history of the 20th century. You need to really study it a little bit more to understand how the world really works. You think the world is a nice, free, fair place, rules based order, and all that? What nonsense. The 20th century has been the American century, it's been the American imperial era, and now the American imperial era may perhaps be under threat. And if the Chinese succeed, you're going to see a Chinese imperial era. So that's just how it is. Why Greek and Indian mythology has so much of similarities? Because the Greeks are descendants of ancient, very ancient Indians. So the Hellenic peoples are the Greeks. They are the descendants of the Vedic Alina clan. That's why all of their mythology is an offshoot of Indian mythology. Their entire pantheon of gods is an offshoot of the Indian pantheon of gods. We had Dios Pitro, the one of the oldest gods in the Vedic pantheon, who became Zeus Pater. Zeus, the Greek thunder god. Zeus Pater, in turn, became Jupiter, who is the Roman thunder god. And we also have Perun, who is the Slavic thunder god, and Thor, who is the uh, Nordic thunder god. These are all different interpretations of Lord Indra. That's all it is. So the motherland of the Indo-European world is India. It's where the entire culture came from, and that's why we have so many similarities between Indian mythology, Indian culture, etc., and all these other Indo-European offshoots, European offshoots, I would say. Okay, let us take uh, one or two more questions. How can we stop being mediocre and excel in our lives? By changing our standards, by not tolerating mediocrity, by not tolerating failure in ourselves and in others. That's it. If you change your standards, you will change your life. If you give yourself high standards and you do your best to live up to those high standards, you will no longer be mediocre. It's very simple. What's the difference between a pulsar and a magnetar? I have at least 2 videos on this. Please check it out. You will see the details in that. Okay. I can see so many questions that are being repeated. Vimanas, I don't know about Vimanas. Uh, Willie Bond says, as an American, I can tell you that to read Smedley Butler's War is a Racket. The people with too much money have destroyed the American Republic and are imperialists. 6 Latin leaders caught cancer. Very interesting. Thank you for the book reference. I'll certainly check it out. Thank you. Is the Belt and Road of China a threat for India from the security perspective? Yes, it is a threat from a variety of perspectives. So what it does is that it creates an infrastructure for China to exploit in a variety of ways. It So it has security implications as well. If the Chinese can send trains anywhere they want at any frequency they like, they can also send soldiers in there, and they can also create these networks of influence, economic networks, and so much more. So it is certainly a threat from India from multiple perspectives, and also from the security perspective. So, for instance, the Belt and Road infrastructure they are building also goes through Tibet, and that's all rail networks, right? And now the rail networks they are extending those the same networks to come to almost India's border with Tibet. So it's going to enable them to send soldiers at any time they want. So that's one way to look at it, right? So it is certainly a threat. Okay. Library of Alexandria versus Library of Nalanda, both of them got burned. Which one contained more knowledge? I would say it was the Library of Nalanda and other Indian libraries that contain much more knowledge. Is Kumari Kandam true? Please answer this, sir. There is no evidence that Kumari Kandam is true. Right? There's no scientific evidence. There's no geological evidence. There is no evidence anywhere that this continent existed. Today, we can actually look beneath the surface of the sea, and we can map the ocean bed, and that's been done, and there is no trace whatsoever of any ancient continent that may have existed in the past, uh, to the south of the peninsular region of India. So Kumari Kandam is a myth. Okay. How to know if the source of knowledge is genuine? You will you can understand if a source of knowledge is genuine or not only if you are more knowledgeable. So if you are a really well read person, then you will know if somebody is lying or trying to fudge something. But if you are not a well read person, then how will you know? So the only way to know if some source of knowledge is genuine or not is to be extremely well read yourself. There are no shortcuts in life, my dear friends. There are absolutely no shortcuts in life. You have to put in the hard work in order to become knowledgeable, and only then can you tell if a source of knowledge is genuine or not. That's how it is. There are no shortcuts in life. All right, where else are we? What else do we have? What's a parallel universe? Could there be potentially be ones that contain doppelgangers of everyone on Earth? Potentially anything is possible, but the parallel universe theory is pseudoscience. It's not science, it's not physics, it's pseudoscience. And the problem is these days even pseudoscience passes off as science. See, a theory that is non-falsifiable is not a scientific theory. A scientific theory is one that must be falsifiable. So if I have a hypothesis or a theory, then it should be something that can be falsified with experiment or with theory, or by putting out a better theory. If you can't do it, if you simply cannot falsify it, then it's not science anymore, it is pseudoscience. And this entire business of parallel universes is pseudoscience because there is no way to disprove it. We cannot observe anything that is beyond the observable universe. Then how can we even talk about parallel universes? They may possibly exist, but there is no way of proving it or disproving it, and therefore there's no point even discussing it, right? So yes, certainly there could be potentially any universes out there that contain exact replicas of everybody on Earth. Sure, it is possible. It may also be possible that there is a teapot in orbit between Mars and Jupiter, a red teapot in orbit between Mars and Jupiter. It's possible, yes, but is it really possible? I mean, it's can you really falsify it? You can't falsify it, and therefore, you know what? There's no point discussing it. Okay, my friends, let's take one final question. Is there any interesting question out here? Uh, why all Maos have Bharatiya Maos ancestry? Bajra is still grown in Rajasthan, Gujarat. I know it is still grown in Rajasthan and Gujarat, but it is no longer a staple crop India wide, right? Okay, now why do all mice have Bharatiya mouse ancestry? That's an interesting question. This is by Subhita Devi. So I haven't studied this in great detail. I had seen a paper a long time ago. It does appear that all mice in Eurasia seem to be descended from an ancestral mouse that lived in India several thousand years ago. So that is a very interesting point. That's something I need to look into in more detail. But once again, it points to the veracity of the out of India theory, not the Aryan invasion theory or Aryan migration tourism picnic theory. Nowadays, there is even an Aryan refugee theory. The thing is, almost all mice across Eurasia, Europe, and Asia seem to have Indian mouse ancestry, which means that their ancestor was an Indian mouse who lived several thousand years ago. So that and once again, mice don't migrate on their own; they travel with human beings. Surreptitiously, they will travel, but they will certainly travel only with humans because they are kind of a domesticated species. So that's interesting. Yeah, so it would mean that it indicates a migration of Indians beyond India, and with their travels they also brought along their mice. That's what it would indicate. Okay, all right, I think I'm going to stop it here. Thank you very much everybody for your questions. Very interesting questions as always. Some were really interesting. So, yeah, that brings us to an end of this session, and we shall continue next week. And I'm going to have more interesting things coming in the coming weeks, days, and weeks. So, thank you, everyone, once again, and take care. And I will see you very soon. Bye.